Today, I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Megan Anna Neff to the channel. Dr. Neff is a psychologist, researcher, and writer whose own late-in-life autism and ADHD diagnoses transformed both her personal journey and her professional mission. Through her work at Neurodivergent Insights, she provides educational resources, trainings, and visual tools to help autistic and ADHD adults better understand themselves. She recently published her new book, The Autistic Burnout Workbook, which we're going to talk about in the video, and she's passionate about bringing lived experience and research together to improve mental health support for neurodivergent individuals. In today's conversation, we'll be covering the topic of autistic burnout, especially as it pertains to parenting and the recent news of RFK Jr.'s autism study. Here's our conversation. We're going to kind of jump into the topic of burnout. And I know many people on my channel are asking me, Taylor, how do I deal with burnout as an autistic parent? So I wanted to bring this up for you. You're a neurodivergent mother, and how does, we can't escape burnout. How does it show up for you in your life as an autistic parent?
That's such a hard topic. And it's so hard, I think, partly because there's, especially in the States, but in a lot of countries, there's just so many systemic pieces that aren't in place to support parents in general. So a lot of parents, especially since the pandemic, are experiencing more parental burnout because we're often doing more. But then, yeah, absolutely throw in being neurodivergent. So for me, it's autism and ADHD, and then having neurodivergent kids. It's like not even parenting on hard mode. We need like a better metaphor. It's beyond, because any one of those, like being a parent while autistic or ADHD is hard. Parenting an autistic ADHD kid, like there's more complex needs. Mm-hmm. Either one of those is hard on their own. Compound them, it's a lot. So how do I manage it? It really, I almost want to tease it apart by like developmental stages. When my kids were young, I didn't handle it well in the sense of, first of all, I just didn't know. Like I didn't know about their neurodivergence. I didn't know about mine. So I was in a pretty chronic state of fight, flight, freeze. I would feel like I was just rotating between them. And I was so confused as to why parenting was so much harder for me. Like I'd look at the other moms who could go to the playground and do all these transitions and just be like, why am I failing so much as a parent? Now, as my kids are teenagers and preteens, it's a lot. There's different touch points that are hard, but it's a lot easier on the burnout front, on the nervous system regulation front, because I'm not like extending my nervous system to them all day in the same way. So it's looked different at different developmental pieces.
Yeah.
How old are your kids?
Mine are 8 and 11.
Okay.
And how old are yours?
So 11 and 14.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because when parenting changes so much, and I don't think that it's getting easier, it's just getting different. So like you're saying, when my kids were babies, the sensory overwhelm of that, and like I think you mentioned with you giving less of your nervous system to them now that they're older. But when they're babies, it's just the sensory overwhelm of, they're not sleeping and they need to touch you all the time. And if you're nursing, there's that sensory overwhelm. And so the needs definitely shift. I mean, you mentioned the playground too. And that made me feel, seen, because I'm like, it's hard to go to the playground. You got to transition, you got to get snacks, you got to get water, and then there's got to be enough.
You got to keep your kids alive when they're like climbing up and wanting to do weird stuff because they're hyperactive and they don't understand height.
Yeah, and my son with his proprioception, he's so off. So like he can't judge like the distance between things, and so you can't just sit there and like watch your kids. You have to be like on edge,
hypervigilant.
Like making sure. Yeah, hypervigilant.
And then there's like people trying to talk to you, and you're like, how are you talking? Like, aren't you just tracking your kids like hypervigilantly?
Yes. I know. We had this new neighbor that moved in a couple weeks ago, and she sits down, and it was really cool to meet her. She just moved here from Colombia, but she didn't really speak English. So not only was she trying to talk to me, but I was like using my Spanish to try to talk with her while like keeping my kids, on the playground. So it's like other people just seem to be able to seamlessly kind of integrate some of these experiences, but the language just kind of fails because it's hard to even put words to how different it is to parent a neurodivergent kid, even on the playground, since we're talking about playgrounds.
And language for both, right? Language for parenting a neurodivergent kid, like where other parents are like, oh, you just do this. And you're like, yeah, no, that doesn't work. And
Mm-mm.
then for the experience of being. So like one language that I found at one point was being like out-touched or over-touched. And that language, as soon as I got that, I was like, oh my gosh, yes. Because that was, I nursed and being autistic, I was reading all of the things and trying to follow all the good mom rules. So I was
Mm-hmm.
reading, I read a lot of midwifery books, which that in and of itself is interesting because I ended up with complex births and C-sections, and I had so much shame on that because I was trying to follow all the right rules. Anyways, as part of that culture, it's like, nurse till 2 or 3. So I nursed my kids a really long time, and looking back, especially nursing with one of my kids, there was a lot of sensory stuff happening both for them and for me. Looking back, it actually would have probably protected the attachment to have stopped nursing sooner than I did.
Hmm.
But there's also the pressure of following all the rules, I think, can show up in interesting ways. But yes, being overtouched, the sensory overwhelm, I will still get visceral memories in my body when I think back because I was often wearing a baby. I was managing meltdown. It was so much.
It's so much. Yeah, just even having that word overtouched, I mean, that can help. If I would have had that back then and just understood that I'm kind of at my capacity here. But I think it's important, you mentioned, I'm glad you brought this up. I have a friend, I believe that she's autistic, and I think she's on that route too. But she was trying to go through the protocol of like having the best delivery and like doing everything well for her kid, and it didn't go the way that she wanted. And I think there's been a lot of pain and a lot of shame around not doing it the way that she intended to. And then I think there's also shame too for autistic people with that. Why am I overtouched? Like, why can't I just hold my kid the way, as much as they need to be held or whatever? I think there's a lot of shame there that a bunch of times we don't get to talk about or explore.
So much shame, so much parental shame. Or even if we're sensory overloaded and we like pop off and we say something that's hurtful, and it's like, oh my goodness, I would never want to talk to my kid that way. And
Mm-hmm.
what happened there? And if we don't have language for sensory meltdowns, we don't understand why that happens. So language, yeah, I think that's been a huge shift in our family, just developing language for these experiences. And I think actually does connect to we protect burnout is understanding what's happening, having language for it. And then that helps us have a bit more agency of like, okay, I'm overtouched. So I'm going to actually communicate this to my kid instead of
Mm-hmm.
popping off and saying like, you know, something that might be harmful. Like I'm overtouched right now. I need a body boundary. Like, and then redirecting them and saying like, let's go cuddle on the couch in like 30 minutes and kind of being able to put some framework around touch. And again, it will depend a bit on the age of the kid, but having
Mm-hmm.
language to describe what's happening so the child doesn't feel rejected. And so that we're also communicating what it looks like to communicate about our needs and our body boundaries and language. Like so much of it comes back to language.
Yeah, I think the timer is a great idea too, because then it's like the child can understand, okay, well, I know my kids, if there's an indefinite amount of time, like we'll do it later or whatever. Oh my gosh, their brain like breaks. So, if I'm overtouched, like you said, saying, okay, well, let's set a timer, and in 30
Mm-hmm.
minutes, let's meet on the couch and we'll watch a TV show together, or whatever you want to do. I think the timer is very helpful with the kids as well. And then I try to remind myself that, especially when you have neurodivergent kids, they're going to have these issues as well. So when I
Mm-hmm.
feel ashamed of this stuff, it's like, well, I'm teaching them how to navigate this in their life as well. I'm giving them the words to understand, like, whenever they experience this, they can also advocate for themselves. So that's one thing I try to remember, because it is really hard as a mom with that mom guilt.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And because you're modeling for them, this is what it looks like to self advocate. This is what it looks like to have healthy boundaries. And I think when we're autistic and parenting, it can be hard for us to say no because we're often kind of healing our own stuff. And so I think one of the ways that can sometimes show up is like, well, I have to give my kid everything they want because that's the
Yes.
opposite of what I got. And
Mm-hmm.
that's actually not necessarily what they need. Then that doesn't give you the opportunity to model kind of how to have these needs and navigate about them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we've got a lot of language we've developed that, yeah, I used to have shame on. So like, I'm trying to think of clashing sensory needs. That's something I talk about a lot. So like family movies have never been, or family vacations or family anything, family meals have never been connecting. And so having language to say, okay, there's some clashing needs going on. Let's identify what those are. Let's problem solve them together. Whereas before it would just be like, well, this child's being obnoxious and this child's being too sensitive. Like that's the language they'd have for each other.
Right.
Another one is like task switching. So if a child asks me for something and I'm in like deep monotropic focus, I'll say, can I have 5 minutes to task switch? And then we'll do that. And now they use that language. If I, dinner's ready or this, it's like, my brain needs 5 minutes to task switch. So now it's just this shared language that's part of the family culture.
Yeah, that's really helpful too, because that task switching, especially for me in the evening, it's really difficult. But that would be a great word to use with my kids. Another word you mentioned, what did you say? What was the term with the clash?
Clashing sensory needs. So if there's, because a lot of conflicts, especially sibling conflicts, would emerge when they just had opposite sensory needs. So one of my kids is more sensory seeking and hyperactive and ADHD dominant. One is more autistic dominant. So like if one of my children is physically stimming or needing to move, and that's activating the auditory sensitivities of my other child, then instead of it escalating into a fight, kind of capturing that, okay, there's some competing sensory needs here. Let's pause and sort out what needs to happen. Does this child need to kind of scoot their body so they're not in the visual field of the other one? Do we just need to be done watching the show together? And then also with me and the children, right? Because sometimes we'll have clashing sensory needs, and I can name that in a way where it's not, it depersonalizes it, because this is the problem. It's external to you or me, and now we can come together to be problem solvers of this problem we're having, because we just have different needs here. It's not that you're good and I'm bad, or you're annoying and I'm too sensitive. It's just,
well, and it gives them autonomy as well, which I've noticed is so important, is for autistic people, especially being able to feel that sense of autonomy. Okay, I can make a choice to change my environment or have more control over this. But another term that I've heard used, I can't remember where it came from, was stim clash. So when my kids are like, one of my kids will verbally process, but my other kid needs quiet time. And the stim clash is real, and that's a real challenge that we have. But okay, so what I wrote down over here that would love to talk about with you. So you're talking about this is happening, and I know that this kid needs this and this kid needs this. So let's talk about mental load, because separately from even being neurodivergent, okay, the mental load, especially on a mother, to remember all these things, like when this kid is in meltdown, they need this. When this kid is in a meltdown, they need this snack, but not this snack. So how do we deal with this extra mental load as a neurodivergent parent? There's so many things that we have to remember for our kids.
Oh, I love that question of mental load. And that is interesting. That's part of the invisible. So in two-parent families, that's part of the invisible labor that often it's one of the parents' load is often holding that, and that often doesn't get appreciated enough or talked about enough when there's kind of negotiation around domestic tasks and so forth. I don't know that I've got a lot of good strategies on that. I feel like for me, it's been a lot of trial and error of when it's gone really badly. Part of how I move through my emotions of that is I do a lot of analysis and kind of mapping out, where did that go wrong? What could I have done differently? At what point? This is what I'll do moving forward. And for me, my brain's really associative, so it's like a memory. I hold it as a memory of like, okay, last time this happened, this is what was needed, versus a list. I think a list, my brain would have a harder time holding that. I will also share, and this is, I think, part of why I can actually sometimes get uncomfortable around parent conversations, but I feel like it's a really important thing to name. I have a lot of parental privilege. That's not really a word we use, but in the sense that I'm married to someone who has incredible executive functioning, and I sometimes joke, like, the best accommodation I have is marrying a neurotypical. And so if I'm being honest, he does a lot of the mental load, and he's been also really open to kind of gender flipping a lot of, what is often done in kind of het cis marriages.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly don't know how a lot of autistic moms do it, in the sense that I know there's so much privilege in that. There's so much I offload because he does mentally hold a lot of the things for the kids.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing that, and it's reminding me of something I read in your. I have a little sticky note here in your book. Is it okay to share a little blurb out of here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so this was on one of the pages about ways to turn down your faucet, which I'm guessing is like the input, the streams of input in your. So it says to seek social support, withdraw strategically when necessary, and to drop unnecessary demands. And so I love this book because it's so practical. So a lot of times it's like, take deep breaths and whatever. That's good and helpful. But like, okay, it says ask my mom to watch the kids once a week. Discuss with my partner about primarily communicating via text instead of spoken conversations. These are all great things. I've never seen these in another like autistic publication before, but I think that's so important. And I think I've realized too, for myself and other autistic people who tend to be people pleasers, it's really, really hard to ask for help. It's really hard to say mom, or, if your parents don't live close by, even a neighbor. But we have to reach out and ask for support because it's just so incredibly difficult to try to manage all of this on our own.
And that's, again, that's that compounding of, that's true for all modern families. Like, we were never meant to do life the way we're doing it in modern society, like these nuclear families that are disconnected from community and where we're doing all of it on our own. So all parents are feeling the stress of that. And then you throw on top of that disability and neurodivergence. And it's like, this isn't how humans were intended to live. And we feel that. It goes back to the canary in the coal mine analogy of how autistic people will often be impacted first. Like, I think we're also seeing that in our home life, in our parental setup of, this is not how humans were meant to do life and community. And we especially feel the impact of that.
Yeah, there's so many connections I want to make. My brain's going in all directions with this, but I do think in the best way, autistic people tend to be very sensitive to those changes, like you're talking about with the canary in the coal mine. And so a lot of times we get down on ourselves thinking like, why can't I handle this? Well, what if nobody's supposed to handle this? What if the system has worked against us to the point that we're now the ones who are feeling this and able to speak out about it? Like, it shouldn't be this way. And that's why I feel like now more than ever, autistic voices are so important, because I feel like we bring a really important perspective of, hey, what happens when we slow down and we listen to our nervous system and we regulate it before we keep, adding commitments and demands into our lives? It would totally change the way that we approach modern living.
There's something about how you said what you just said that I really love. And I've at times struggled to articulate this, and I'm starting to be able to articulate it more fully now. But the narrative often goes something like there's just a temptation, I think, when we discover our identity to kind of start almost othering neurotypicals in response to the othering we've had. So it's tempting to be like, well, neurotypicals can do this, but that doesn't work for us. But what if it's not like that? What if it's not us versus them? What if it's like we as a society, as humans, have drifted from what like the human experience was meant for, what community was meant for? Like, we are losing our humanity as a whole, and we're more deeply impacted by that in some ways. But also maybe we can help show another way if we. Yeah. Like, there's just something about how you said that felt very human and connecting, and not, well, neurotypicals can do it this way, but then like the kind of us-them narrative that is easy to fall into in this space.
It is, and I think that's our only hope, is not making this an us-them thing. We're all in this together, and as I study autistic accommodations, most things that are good for autistic people are good for everyone. And it's also reminding me of a question I get asked a lot. Can neurodivergent people marry non-neurodivergent people? And I'm like, okay, well, you could marry someone who thinks that they're autistic, and then 7 years later they realize, oh my gosh, I've been autistic this whole time. So if we all just realize, it is a spectrum of neurodiversity and humanity, and it's not us versus them, it's all of us together, and every day we're figuring out different variations of like how we overlap and all need each other. So I think the language is so important there. And maybe it would be an okay time to transition into kind of talking about the news right now. I think, and I try not to get too political on my channel because I know it can be triggering, but I do think it's very important we talk about the autism news in the research that has been brought up by RFK Jr. to study autism. And it's very tempting here to be us versus them. And I don't think that's the solution either. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a question here, but can I just, where are you at right now with kind of processing the news affecting our community right now?
One of the words that popped in my head when you said that was transformational justice. I've been leaning into, there's a book I've really been loving this year. It's called Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. And one of the ways I've responded is through slowing down and metabolizing. And the idea of transformational justice is the work starts with ourselves. This is an interesting thing that I imagine you'll relate to, but sometimes when you have a large platform, there can be a lot of pressure to like, well, this is in the headline. Have you responded yet? And at one point, and it goes back to burnout, I think a couple years ago, I just made the decision. That's not how I do content. I don't do like fast, quick responses to headlines, partly because then it's the decision paralysis of what do I respond to and what do I not. But also just I was burning out my nervous system quite a lot. So a word I use with my team is slow advocacy, in the sense of one thing that's really important to me. And I think partly as a psychologist, I think a lot about things like projection. I think about how when we share unmetabolized emotions with others, on some level, unconsciously, we're asking them, hey, will you metabolize this for me? Because I've not metabolized it. And it's important to me that I'm not doing that on my platforms. So for me, I slowed a lot of creation down in January, February. Patrick and I on Divergent Conversations, we actually recorded an episode, and I was really dissociated. It was about the politics. And I was like, Patrick, that was a lot of unmetabolized emotions. I don't think it's going to help people. Can we just not release it? And then I asked for a podcast break because I knew if I was going to show up, I wanted to do it in a metabolized way. And so that's when I kind of went inward, and that's what I have to do to process complex things. I read things that were really soothing and grounding, like Emergent Strategy. I connected to my values of like thinking through how do I want to show up. Community interdependence was a big piece of that. And then most of my stuff was through writing, because writing is how I metabolize. So I do like essays on Sundays. And so my processing started there. And then once I felt grounded, it branched out to having conversations with people in the community. But it had to start from a metabolized, grounded place for me. And that has meant my responses have been slower. But I feel like that's the only way I could show up in this moment.
Well, I so appreciate that. And I touched on this maybe in a different way in one of the videos that I responded to this autism news. And I mean, what would it look like if everybody did that? If everybody could recognize in their body, like, oh, I'm not ready to talk about this yet. I need to process this before I spew this onto the public, because it seems like there's so many people in leadership who have all these emotions that they haven't processed. And then that fear and chaos and confusion, it gets bred into society. And so I really respect and appreciate that you can step back. And I love that term, slow advocacy. I'm going to use that. I feel like the most lasting, powerful change is usually that slow, intentional change. It's very, and this goes for relationships too. Like it's not the quick changes of, oh, I'm going to stop doing that, or I'm going to change my habits or whatever. It's the slow, intentional connecting every day and tuning into like what's available. And so I think that's really important for our community to realize. We're all wanting like, what can I do? How do we stop this? How do we, there's not a lot of like quick fixes right now. It does start, like you said, it does start with us. you said the work starts with ourselves, and a lot of us don't want to hear that because we want something that we can go out there and do. But if you think about the ripple effects that each one of us has by turning inward, processing, figuring out how to deal with that, and then doing whatever we do best to communicate that. So if that's in writing, if that's just loving our kids and teaching them how to love other people, and I don't want to say just there because that's a huge societally transformative thing. But each of us focusing in on what our strengths are, and that really is what creates, I think, the largest change overall. But it's a hard time to accept that.
It is absolutely a hard time to accept it because it's partly it's pulling a lot of our fight energy out of us. And I tend to go very meta as a way to like, that helps me regulate my emotions in general. But so part of it is getting above the noise of like, where are we trying to head here? And so for me, I often go back to humanity. It's, we're wanting a more humane society. And to do that, I've got to stay connected to my humanity, which means I can't get pulled into the urgency of fight, flight, and then be dehumanizing others when I'm in that urgency. And so it's, it starts with connecting back to my humanity, seeing the humanity of others, and then moving from there. That's actually something I loved about, there's a video you released amidst all this. I think it was just like a 5-minute video on how to respond to when the directory was in motion. And it felt so human. You were naming the fear, you were giving people information, and then you were saying, and here's what you can go do. And it felt connected. Like you felt connected to yourself, you felt connected to the people you were talking to. And that, like I was able to take that in a way where my fight flight stuff wasn't activated. And I was like, oh, I feel like I understand what's happening a little bit better, and I feel empowered, and I feel connected to Taylor, who I don't even, like, we haven't even met yet.
Yeah. That makes me, it just kind of goes with what you've said before this too. It's everything's connecting in my brain. I am not the kind of person to respond immediately to headlines either, but this issue with the autism study, it resonated so deeply within me that I was just like, I'm going to listen to my intuition. I want to be on top of this. I want to report on this. And it's just making me think like, this is not usually me, but when we're all working within our capacities. So for you with this issue, you need to take a step back and be introspective and process. And for me, for whatever reason, I needed to process it differently this time and was able to come to the forefront and do this. And I think, you know, when we can all realize that we process it differently, I don't have to be putting out content or I can take a break, whatever. We all kind of show up for each other without even really knowing it. Like it's more of a seamless support system.
And that's interdependence. And I think that's the beauty of like a neurodiverse community in the sense of like, well, you can do this and you can do that. Like, so like for me, that's part of slow advocacy is how do I metabolize stuff and what do I contribute? Like sending out hot reels on topics of me talking. No, like that's not my processing style. It's not going to contribute goodness to the world. So I like hibernated and wrote a 4,000 word essay on the history of autism and like why the rates are changing. And that's what I can contribute. And I couldn't have done like the video that you did. I couldn't have done that. But it's such a beautiful testament to interdependence of we will all show up differently. And then ideally people will get what they need, especially when we lean into like, yeah, this is how I hold on to my humanity. And this is how I show up in this moment. And I'm not going to stretch myself to show up in a way that's incongruent or misaligned. And that actually feeds back to burnout because the more we can stay in alignment, then the more resilience we have.
So going back to burnout, can I ask, have you noticed, like for me, the self-awareness around understanding that I have burnouts has changed them just in the fact that I can name it. I have like different protocols that help me once I realize that I'm in burnout. So how has understanding that you have burnouts helped you navigate them? And also, are there any signs that your body gives you to help you understand that you're headed towards burnout?
Yeah, so much of it does go back to alignment and self-knowledge, which self-knowledge maybe sounds simple, but it's complex for a lot of us, right? Interoception differences, alexithymia, masking that makes it hard to know like our true pleasures, delights. So as I've become more aware of my natural energy rhythms, of my burnout signs, yeah, it's easier when I'm trending that way to be like, what do I need to do to get back into alignment? And so some of the signals I'm trending that way, um, a loss of interest, but not necessarily in the depressed way, because I also experience depression. In the, I don't have energy, or my brain feels stuffed and it just can't take more in. So like, no more listening to podcasts, no more taking in information. So it's just like there's a cognitive capacity. Wording also gets a lot harder for me. And so like just putting words into sentences I get a lot of brain fog. And this also overlaps for me with long COVID, and I'll have, every time I get COVID, there's just like 4 months. I feel like I lose myself for 4 to 6 months. And it's, so it's also hard. And I think a lot of autistic people are navigating burnout and co-occurring health conditions. So it can be hard to tease out. And it's not necessarily a teasing out, because part of burnout is like the health conditions contribute to it. So there's a lot I can sort out in my brain. I tend to be more, I will start withdrawing more. And again, there's like a different kind of withdrawal when it's strategic versus when it's depressive withdrawal. Mm-hmm. And then there's a few things I'll do. It's hard for me because I talk about this fairly publicly. I do identify with the term workaholic in the sense that I would say it's a struggle, and I understand it though. It's how I quiet my mind. It's how I escape some of the darkness of my mind. But that gets really hard in burnout because then I can't access that as much.
That's a really great perspective with just work and not being able to access that when you're in burnout. I'm really resonating with that too, because I get so frustrated in burnout because my body is not letting me do what my mind wants to do. My mind wants to work.
Yes. That, you just said it so beautifully. My body won't do what my mind wants to do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's it for me too. And when I'm depressed, my mind doesn't want to do anything. But when I'm in burnout, my mind wants to do it, but my body's like, yeah, no.
Do you go into more detail there with burnout versus depression in your workbook?
There's a couple pages on it. Like there's a Venn diagram on it. I don't go into extensive detail. I do have articles up on it and a training I just posted that goes into it. Because this is, I think, really important for people to understand, but also clinicians, because it's easy to be like, well, that's depression. But then if you're not also supporting the burnout, that can make the depression worse. But then my other fear is that autistic people are like, well, this is burnout, but maybe it's actually also depression. And then that's really important to address alongside the burnout. So I talk about it a little bit.
And then you have more resources on your website.
Yeah.
Because those two terms are so important. Like if I would have understood the distinction between autistic burnout and depression in high school, that would have totally changed my life. I think, it's really important to find everybody check out these resources on Dr. Neff's website.
Like change your life. Can I ask, like change your life? Sure. How?
So I had family members that would come to my parents and say like, what's wrong with Taylor? She's so sad, or she's so whatever. She's so not herself. And I think I saw myself as maybe this like depressed person for a while. But I look back and I only share this just for context. It's like, I hate the ego part of this, but like I was homecoming queen. I was like president of National Honor Society. I was first chair flute player. I was in all AP classes. So it's like easy to look back and be like, I was just completely at the top of my nervous system, like burning myself out over and over and over again. And if I would have understood the cycle of burnout as an autistic person, to know like, hey, maybe you're not going to take all the AP classes like all of your friends are doing, and that's okay because we're going to take care of our body. I think it would have helped me have significantly fewer health issues when I was younger.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I resonate a lot with that hyperachievement bit, which I think is a natural response to not feeling like enough and to having a lot of shame, and that so deeply connects to burnout. And that's where, like with burnout, I talk about that in the book, is there's pragmatic structural things we can put into place, like accommodations and sensory supports. But then there's a lot of depth work that goes into actually building a life resilient to burnout. And honestly, I haven't figured it out. I'm still in it. I'm still in the work. And like the hyperachievement of how do I feel safe in the world when I'm not hyperachieving? Because that's such a burnout driver. Protective in some ways on like an identity, social, like, okay, I can feel confident about myself if I'm hyperachieving in these ways.
So once you realize that you are having burnout symptoms in your life, what are some of the first steps that you take to start dealing with that?
Some of the first steps is I prioritize my sleep. So I can kind of joke at myself about this now. Like my team, I did an interview on sleep recently, and someone from my team was like, "Are you kidding me? You're talking about sleep?" Because they see how like late I work and how like when I'm in an okay stretch, I do not follow the sleep practices that I preach, and so I often say like, "Do what I say, don't do what I practice," and partly because I'll get hyper focused, and then I do have some unhelpful sleep patterns. So the first thing I do, but I know what to do. So the first thing I'll do is I'll tighten up my sleep. So I'll like tighten up my sleep hygiene, my sleep practices. And that's the first place is I tighten up my sleep to make it, and I prioritize it. I work really hard to stay more in alignment. So instead of having friction, like working upstream, like I'll get a lot more almost ruthless in, okay, I'm trying to do this task. I'm trying to do a writing task, but my brain's not in it. I'm just not going to push it. And so it's like, okay, my energy, I can do design work right now. And so flipping between tasks in a way that's more aligned with where my capacity is at. A lot of more sensory supports. So I'll use, I love the Sensate. Do you have any kind of vagal nerve stimulator? Do you use that?
No, I don't.
I love vagal nerve stimulators for nervous system support. So when I'm in burnout, like you will find me, I've got a Moon. This sounds like an infomercial, but I've got a Moon pod, which is it's a really kind of comfy beanbag chair. I'll put it on my couch. I'll have a weighted blanket over me. I'll have a stim song on, and I'll have my vagal nerve stimulator on me.
That sounds like a great burnout protocol. Like that's
like that's like, and you'll see me there like pretty much all day on the couch. And then if I might be watching like a special interest show if I'm just not able to access work, or I might be doing design work, something really like what I call a bucket B task. Partly because for me, I feel stressed when I'm not working. And so it's actually more soothing to work than not work, which again, that gets back into my deep psychology I need to work through.
No, I'm resonating with that because you're talking about like with your sleep protocol and stuff, like do as I say and not as I do. And I appreciate the realness there because there's a lot of times, I'm big on preaching, give yourself grace, like one thing at a time. And like, I'm so hard on myself, and I know I need to rest, but I'd rather be working. And I know I need to go sit on the couch, but I can finish this, and then it's like 3 hours later and hyper focused and I'm still on my website. And so yeah, I just appreciate that. And that's why I like your resources too. Cause I think if anybody's like, I've figured it out, I have the solution to, then I'm like, I don't think so. So I just appreciate the humanity side of that, of like, I'm figuring it out and this is what works sometimes.
It doesn't honor the complexity of our experience if we're like, I've figured out this 5-step process and just do it. And and that, frankly, it's kind of invalidating, which a lot of us have had a lot of. If there is any 5-step protocol that solves any of these things, because it's hard being autistic.
Yeah, it is. And speaking of being autistic, but social media content creation, do you deal with like not wanting to be seen on social media? Because I get to points where I'm like, I don't want anybody to look at me. I don't want anybody to listen to me. It's hard.
I don't know how you do it. Like I'm just like this year getting comfortable on video. I don't know how you do it. It's in that I literally have a whole essay on this that I wrote as part of my metabolizing, is because when the book came out, my publisher was then like, you're going to be on the local news. Like they have PR and they set up things. So I was like doing local news stuff. And I was struggling so much with being perceived. That's why I asked for the podcast pause. And again, it was one of those things I needed to retreat. I needed to metabolize. I needed to figure out what is a comfortable way for me to be perceived, and then not force myself out of alignment there. And so so for me, there's certain things I put into place where it's like, I can handle being perceived in this way. And then once I feel safe there, I often am more comfortable stretching. But it has also come back to honoring that I need to speak from a place of alignment and not from a place of urgency of other people telling me, you need to show up right now in this way. Otherwise I will collapse and I will shut everything down and I will go disappear. And so thinking through my needs and then creating boundaries around that has been the only way I've been able to stay. I've been doing this work for about 4 years now. And it's been a lot of creators. You see that they kind of pop up and then they disappear. And I get it.
Especially autistic creators.
That's what I mean. Autistic creators. Yeah. It's really hard. It's really hard.
And it's hard because that's happening behind the scenes. So like content creator 1A, they're taking a break, but in the meantime, you're being bombarded by content creator B, C, D, E. So it seems like everybody's just working all the time when in reality, all of these autistic content creators behind the scenes are taking some much needed time away. But I mean, do you feel that way even with written resources? Because I do. Whenever I put something written out too, it's that idea of being perceived. It's like I just sometimes don't even want people to think about me.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's also the what if I get it wrong, and then I'll go triple check a study, and sometimes, especially with the ADHD and dyslexia, sometimes I do get it wrong. So I think embracing a growth mindset has been huge. Otherwise, I would just disappear in shame.
It's hard to see those videos of me that pop up from not forever, but years ago, and I see me saying something. It's not that I disagree with that, but I would have said it differently, or it's just weird to see stuff popping back up.
Absolutely, and I've got a lot of things like that. And one thing I'll try and flip it, not to I'll let myself feel that, and then one thing I'll try to do to kind of support myself in that moment is look at how much you've learned in the last year. Isn't that cool? Or I'll try and reflect on. And then I'll think in a year from now, I hope I'm looking back at what I'm saying now and being because it means I've been growing. It means I've been learning.
Yeah. And I'm learning about myself because my brain right now is wanting to skip past this part and let's talk less about reflection and
and more on self-criticism. Just stay in the self-criticism. No, Taylor, what were you thinking? Yeah. What's helping you? Because especially I do think being video perceived, there's just a different. For me, there's a different vulnerability to it. What is helping you to stay in it and to be perceived right now?
I do think, like I said, there was just this resonance that I had with the news right now of, there's sometimes in life when my intuition will be this is for you. And so I have just felt so connected to caring for the community by staying on top of as much as I can with the news right now. But, I'm just giving myself permission, okay, I don't have enough spoons to do my hair and makeup today. So it's, pajamas and my hair is back or whatever. And I'm real self-conscious I'm not very good at where to look on the camera, and I stumble over my words a lot. So just giving myself permission and grace of I just say a lot I'm autistic. I'm autistic. That's what I tell myself. I'm autistic. I'm going to look in different places and my videos are going to look different than other people's. And then I just focus on the why, the why behind what I'm doing. And I don't know. I try to balance. I try to listen to when I get overwhelmed with comments. I want to be in the community and see and interact with the community, but also take breaks when it's okay, these comments are getting a little bit, hard to process. So I'm learning too. I don't have it figured out.
Yeah. I love that part of what helps you is showing up authentically, letting yourself unmask it. I wouldn't have pulled that to the front of my mind, but that's something I do too, of reminding myself, actually, when I embrace my awkwardness and don't overly worry about showing up in some really polished way, that's actually helpful for people to see. And that's part of unmasking.
And that's usually what people resonate the most with too, is when I am I didn't feel like doing my hair today and I'm going to have bad posture and, I'm here, but I'm not feeling great. You know, that's when people are like, me too.
Because it's real, it's human, and it's modeling that like it's okay to do those things. Yeah, yeah. There's something else you said that it's a concept I love from psychology, which is this idea of quiet ego. And I also tapped into that in April, which gave me a sort of momentum I haven't had in a long time. So often when we talk about self-esteem, it's a temptation to treat it like a Goldilocks thing. Like if someone's self-esteem is too grandiose and high, it's like they need to bump it down. Or if someone's self-esteem is too low, they need to bump it up. But one of the most immersive places that is like just tends to emotionally be really good for humans is when we can get into a quiet ego. And that's where I'm not thinking about self. It's not about me. I'm immersed in something that is so much bigger than me. So when you're responding to what's happening in the autism community as I'm making this for the community, it's not about how do I look on camera, because the focus isn't on self, not in a self-critical way, not in a ego way. I'm tapped into something that is so much bigger than me. And that's also what I tapped into, which is where I was able to flip from I can't handle being perceived to it's not about me. And that quieted, the self-criticism quieted because I was in quiet ego.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, bringing it back to your book, because as it relates to workaholism and burnout, how do you finish a book as an autistic person with like, and be able to put a bow on it and be like, done? How do you get to that point?
Well, a few things. I kind of got to cheat on that book, but I took myself to California for a week and I put like no work tasks on. Luke, my spouse, had the kids, and I had a week, so the first 4 chapters I did in that week. And so that was huge. But here's how I kind of cheated on the workbook, which I'm very thankful for my publisher for allowing this, because not all publishers would. But over the years, I've created a lot of digital resources and workbooks. It's how I was able to shift from being a psychologist who did practice to doing neurodivergent insights full time. And each of the chapters, except for the last one, comes from a workbook I had already created. So like I have a sleep workbook, I have a nervous system workbook, I have a sensory workbook, I have a burnout workbook. And so there was, it's a totally different workbook in the sense that I was synthesizing like 100-page workbooks to 20 pages, and then everything was much more refined and going through the process. But really that workbook you see is like 3 years of work that then it took me a year to synthesize. And I have an amazing editorial team from the publishing house who helped just elevate everything. So that is how I was able to do that book in the last year, was because it's a little bit of a cheat workbook, well, and that I already had created a lot of it.
Not necessarily a cheat, but like you're honoring past versions of yourself and the hard work that you put in back then, and it's just kind of all coming together.
Oh, thanks for helping my inner critic. You're right. Yeah. That is it is a synthesis of work I've already done.
It's not a cheat. It's a lot of hard work that probably didn't feel like as hard as you wanted it to feel, since it felt hard at the time, and then now you're using that hard work in the present moment. And
which is maybe like, I'm curious if you relate to this. As an autistic person, I'm like, well, I already did that, so I can't like repurposing is something that I feel weird about, because I'm like, well, if someone follows my Substack, they would see that essay, so why would I then repurpose it over here? So it does feel like a cheat to me, because in my mind, it's like, well, I already put that out once, so it now needs to be new and original. And maybe
I feel that way with like the courses I've made online. It's like, well, I made that last year, and like I need to update it, and like I feel weird having people still buy it, because it's not like I need to revamp it. And it's like, well, a lot of people haven't gotten to experience it at all. And and repurposing stuff from that too, it's hard for me for sure.
And I wonder, is it like, I know part of it's perfectionism, but I also think there's some sort of like rigidity in my thinking around like, you only do something once. And then
what it is for me, I think, is authenticity too. It's like, I feel like if I say it again in a different context, or I don't know. And I'm just very wary of like AI replicating things. So I just want people to feel like when I put something out there that it's real and it's not, regurgitated. But I for sure struggle with rigidity too. I have a lot of OCD tendencies. So
Okay.
rigidity for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And I know that's not a word that's appreciated. I use it for my brain because that's definitely how when it's obnoxious, I'll call it rigidity because I'm like that. That's what that is.
Yeah,
But yeah, I'm
it feels
also
like rigidity.
OCD. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, how do people use this book? Is this kind of like open it and work through it, or do you consult different sections as they become challenges in your life? How would you recommend working through this?
Yeah. So first, I recommend. I mean, it's very interactive, and so I think the first two chapters kind of set the stage of like what burnout is, and then how to create a sort of plan moving forward. And then in general, my recommendation for burnout is to start with where like pushing the needle forward will have the most impact. So like if sleep is really disruptive, I mean, we know sleep is so huge for supporting nervous system resilience and just energy. So either starting with the place it will have the most impact, or so sleep and sensory actually I would say are two really good impactful places to start, or starting with where you have interest, because especially when you're in burnout, like going through a workbook or implementing changes can be really hard. So if it's like, well, I'm kind of like I have a little bit of a special interest around like understanding myself as autistic and developing a sensory lens, then it's like, okay, start with the sensory chapter. So people can hop between, whether maybe they're really interested in learning more about the nervous system, and then leading with where there's the least amount of friction. It keeps coming back to that alignment of like,
Yeah.
where's their least amount of friction? And then, yeah, I'd actually hesitate for people to just like read through it at once because it's a lot of potential change we're talking about implementing. So really kind of sinking into whatever chapter is most relevant at that time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's the approach that works well for me too, is just a little bit at a time. And all of the graphics and how easy it is to read and work through is just icing on the cake for autistic people, I think. So if you like workbooks, which I know if you're watching, you're probably autistic and you probably like workbooks, just to make a couple of generalizations that aren't always true, but I think you'll really, really enjoy Dr. Neff's new book. So I will put a link to that in the description along with Dr. Neff's other resources. Please check her out, support her work, and like this video if it was helpful to you, and share it with somebody else that is struggling with burnout. So thank you so much, Dr. Neff, and I hope to stay connected and be able to collaborate on more fun things in the future.
I would really enjoy that. And thank you so much for having me.